Monsieur Anber.
How's this? Is this good? I feel like I'm too low.
You feel like you're too low?
Yeah,
It's not so bad, actually.
not so bad.
No, I think you're good.
Let's see if I was to prop that up.
There we go. There we go.
Not bad. Not
Yeah,
bad.
I think that's good. And we thank everybody for tuning in to another edition of the Calling Russ Anber Instagram Live. And we got a lot to discuss tonight, I should say. Russ, we're going to, of course, touch on Canelo Bivol, touch on Josh Taylor's fight last weekend and what's going to happen with the rest of the 140-pound division. Tyson Fury, Dillian Whyte, press conference that was a one-man show for Tyson Fury. So there's a lot to get to. And if you do have comments, of course, and questions, please feel free to do so. We'll try to get to them at some point during the broadcast.
Let's do it this way. Now,
Yes.
yeah, that's very important. You know, I know we get a lot of people get on and they want to say hello, and I would love to be able to say hi to everybody. And I see names pop up, and I say, oh, I haven't seen him. And, you know, I'd like to say hi, but we have already things that we're discussing. So if we don't get to you and we don't acknowledge your message, it's not because we didn't see it. We are seeing them, but we're in the flow of doing stuff. So please, please understand that we're trying to, to do this and we have stuff to talk about. And I wish I could get to all the answers, and I'd love to. And look, we just got joined by the new Canadian middleweight champion. So that was nice. So
you were in the corner last week against Jordan Ballmer.
That's correct. So I saw him. I got to see him there. So that was kind of nice that we did that. I think I'm going to plug this in to make sure that I don't run out of juice at any time.
Of course, let me correct myself. You're in the corner of Joshua Frazier on the undercard of the main event.
That's correct.
All right. Okay, Russ, the first thing I got to touch on, we got a lot of topics. You have a relationship, and you've been in the professional corner working with two Ukrainian fighters, two champions, one still current and the heavyweight champion of the world, the other being Vasiliy Lomachenko, who is one of the better fighters pound for pound that we've seen in the last 10 years or so. What are your thoughts? What have you heard from them? And we know what the situation is going on. Both Usyk and Lomachenko, especially Usyk, I believe earlier today, had an interview with CNN International Sports about the situation and the decisions that they have elected to stay in Ukraine and defend their country instead of going somewhere else, of course, as professional athletes and millionaires electing to put their careers aside and really doing something unbelievably brave, which is to take part in this war. So have you spoken to any of them and your thoughts?
I spoke with Usyk. I spoke with Papachenko. I spoke with Andrei Kosolov, who is the in Lomachenko's camp, the psychological guy. When you see him doing all those drills, Dr. Andre. I spoke to them, and I spoke to numerous other friends and associates in the Ukraine that I've had the privilege of meeting and becoming friends with over the years, including Usyk's masseuse. I spoke to him. Usyk's former nutritionist, I spoke to him. We've become friends. Look, it's very sad what's going on over there, and they're all standing strong. And Usyk was very emotional in the messages that he was sending me, and what you see and what he has said on CNN and on Instagram is very sincere and very real. And from the same thing I'm hearing from my other friends, they are not in the position of backing down one little bit. And I don't know if you saw the post today. I put it up on my Instagram that, Usyk says he's not even thinking about or caring about when he's getting back in the ring. Basically, there's more pressing issues at hand for his country. So, I had this discussion earlier this week with Mitch Melnick on the team 690, and when one of the most famous athletes to go to war was Joe Louis when he was drafted in the Second World War. But he went over there. Basically, his job, the popularity of Joe Louis was so immense that his job was to go and visit soldiers in the different camps, wherever they may be, and raise morale and do that. He wasn't actively on the line. And I don't know another time when And the most famous, obviously, draftee was Muhammad Ali, who didn't go because of his religious convictions. And, Usyk might be the first champion of the world to actually go to the front lines and defend the city of Kyiv. So something quite extraordinary. And I hope this comes to an end soon, because even I watched something today just before coming down here, and they were interviewing Ukrainians. I think one of them was a mayor of a city, and in the Russian soldiers that have been captured, they're youngsters of 20 years old, and they say they don't know why they're here either. They don't know why they're being sent to do this mission of taking over Ukraine. So it's a very ugly time in our history, man.
Let me read to you what Usyk was quoted as saying, of course, with the translation in English, that and the quote is, "Maybe I'll sound sentimental, but my soul belongs to the Lord, and my body and my honor belongs to my country, to my family. So there is no fear, absolutely no fear. There's just bafflement. How could this be in the 21st century?" So Usyk's career, clearly, Eddie Hearn earlier this week had said, no, the Joshua rematch is going to happen. And now today, of course, was backtracking, which makes sense that they're not even thinking about the rematch right now. And I'm happy that they're also going to let Usyk, they're not going to pressure him or ask for a interim title in the meantime for Joshua to fight, because I think everybody can understand that this is an extreme situation.
I actually found it very strange that they even announced Bivol and Canelo, at this time. Like, that's a very delicate time to be announcing that a Russian is going to be fighting for the biggest payday in boxing right now against Canelo. I found that a little bit strange that they did that. But look, for a fact, I cannot see this any other way. Now, this is strictly my own opinion, but I cannot see this any other way. Give me a moment to say hello to Bakram. He came on, so I'd like to say Privyet, Bakram. But I have to say that I cannot see how it could be possible that as long as this war is going on, as long as this invasion of Ukraine is going on, how either Loma or Usyk are going to say, hey, I got to drive to the airport. I'm leaving for training camp because I have a fight coming up. Like, in my mind, I knowing them the way they are, I can't see how that conceivably could happen unless there is security of their families and loved ones and their nation at home. I don't see how they're leaving for training camp, or even if they decide to stay in Ukraine and train amidst a war to train to prepare for a fight. I don't see how that can be done. So this is something that's going to be very costly to them and to the boxing world, that we don't get to see the two best fighters in the world fight.
Well, two of the best, some of the best, of course. And it's crazy because Usyk was going to have the Joshua rematch this spring, and Lomachenko, the last time we spoke, was going to probably have the fight against Kambosos in Australia for the lightweight titles. So these are major fights now that are put on the hold. And this is just, of course, a minor occurrence in the grand scheme of things. There's a lot more important stuff going on, but their careers is just terrible timing for the sport of boxing and for their respective careers as well.
Of course it is. It's bad for everybody. And like I said, I'm surprised that they decided to go with the announcement of the Bivol fight this early, and we haven't heard, unlike in some other sports, I haven't heard any backlash out yet about Russian fighters, and I thought that we'd hear some with the announcement of this fight.
Okay, well, do you want to get to Canelo Bivol now then, or do you want, because I was going to talk about Fury Whyte here and then stick in the heavy.
Go ahead, Fury Whyte. I'm good with that.
All right.
The important thing before we get to Fury Whyte, the important thing is that, everybody wants this to come to an end. There's nothing good coming of this, whatever way you look at it. And there are people dying, and there are people suffering, and there will be people even in Russia who are suffering because they're victims of the dictator that's at hand, who says, I'm going to war, and decides to go to war. And this isn't a war that the people have asked for. And it's a very dangerous time, and it's a very ugly time. And I hope somehow, some way, cooler heads prevail, and that there's able to be some kind of ceasefire to this and put an end to this hatred that we shouldn't be having in 2022. It's just despicable. And, people should not be hiding in bunkers because they were invaded by a neighboring country. And it's just not right.
Just before I move on to Fury Whyte, when's the last time you've spoken to either Usyk or Lomachenko by text message or When's the last time
Saturday,
you?
Saturday was the last time I spoke to them. Today I spoke to my other friend Alex in Ukraine. But Saturday was the last time I spoke to Usyk. I messaged Loma, but I didn't get anything back from him. But Papachenko messaged me back. So that was on Saturday.
Okay. And you're still in communication with Egis Klimas, their manager, I would believe?
Yes. Yeah. Indeed.
So keep us posted on that. And, of course, the Klitschko brothers and a ton of other fighters of Ukrainian descent. There's even a Quebec show now that was postponed, or at least not postponed, I should say, but an opponent change for Mikhail Zuski was going to fight a Ukrainian fighter in Boruchuk. So there's a lot of consequences throughout the sports world, and we'll get to some of it a bit later as well. And then in the heavyweight division, the other champion besides Usyk is Tyson Fury. And he has a fight against his mandatory Dillian Whyte that's coming up April 23rd on pay-per-view. And this week was the announcement for that fight at Wembley Stadium. And Dillian Whyte has elected to no-show. And there's a lot said, including Tyson Fury saying that this is going to be his last boxing match. And he's going to retire. He's going to come out as the fattest guy he's ever been for this fight. Like, I don't know what to make of Tyson Fury anymore. And I don't even know if I take whatever he does say seriously, because it seems like he changes his mind constantly. But what did you make of Dillian Whyte no-showing the press conference? Because even though he's going to get a multi-million-dollar payday, I believe in his mind it's still not enough.
I'm surprised that in the contract there is not obligations of what a fighter must fulfill, at least minimal obligations as it pertains to press, media, press conferences, promotion of the show. He's even apparently filed, he's even said that he doesn't even want his likeness used, that you'd be using his likeness illegally. And for some reason, and this goes back to the Rivas fight, that like he has a team of lawyers who are spending time just wanting to sue everybody. And it seems like everybody gets scared. And I know this for a fact, that the story of what happened in the Rivas fight was written, ready to go to press after the Rivas fight. And the editors of the magazine in the UK decided not to run it because they didn't want to be sued by Dillian Whyte. I don't know what to make anymore of Dillian. I don't know. It's an enigma. It's a riddle wrapped in an enigma. I don't know. I don't know what or why he's doing this. It doesn't. Do you not want to have the confrontations, and you're getting into Tyson's head? But from a promoter's perspective, and with the money you're making, you would think that that's an obligation in the contract.
Why don't you have contacts at Top Ring that you could ask that question? Who has, of course, they promote Fury.
Sure. Would you want me to get them on the line now and dial away now while we're live?
I don't know. That's your call. Maybe you'll catch them a bit off guard here, but I'm sure there has to be some incentive, unless because this is a mandatory fight, maybe Dillian Whyte doesn't have to show up and he can just show up at the fight. It's a weird move, but I guess Dillian Whyte's saying, does he have no upside to make more money on pay-per-view sales? Is it a fixed income for this fight?
Yeah, you see, I don't believe he does. That's the same thing that happened with Andre Ward. Did the same thing to Kovalev when it was the pay-per-view, and he didn't want to take part in any of the media stuff. He didn't want to. He did limited because he did not want there to be elevated sales, because Kovalev was getting paid on the pay-per-view sales, and he didn't want that. So he did minimal. Right, he did some, but like the bare minimum. Okay. So.
Do you think this will have any factor at all in Tyson Fury? You think it could, because Fury likes to play in his opponent's head? Do you think it will maybe catch him off guard, that he won't get a chance to see Dillian Whyte up until fight week?
Well, it's been very clear that this has been the hand that Dillian has been playing, right? Ever since the fight has been announced. Have you seen one thing publicly from Dillian Whyte about the fight?
Well, no. In fact, he even waited till the last minute to sign the contract for the deadline for the mandatory obligation.
Right. So, is that his way of playing head games with Tyson, like making himself non-existent, completely not going along the bashing, nothing, just disappeared. He's in Portugal training, and he's training with my very dear friend, Harold Knight.
Dillian Whyte is training with Harold Knight?
Yes, he is. And I have all the respect in the world for Harold Knight. I'd like to actually talk to him about that. I may give him a ring and ask him about that. But very interesting. I don't like to mix business with pleasure, because they he's doing his thing, whatever he's got to do with his camp, and he's not going to go otherwise. And I respect that. But yeah, it's look, it's like he's saying, no, I'm not.
Get Harrow on the program.
I'll tell you what, if it is, we should. If it's something to get into Tyson's head, whether it has or not, I don't know. But it sure has gotten into old Frank Warren's head. You know, poor Frank is going crazy. You know, he's blown a gasket. You know.
And what about Fury saying this is his last fight, no matter what? If that's the case, he won't have defended the heavyweight championship much at all. Like, I know people want to say Tyson Fury is one of the, you can compare it to any era and would have been a difficult out for any heavyweight. Fair enough, but I mean, he's not going to have the greatest CV of all time if he decides to retire after a fight against Dillian Whyte.
I don't think that people care anymore. I don't think fighters themselves care anymore. It's gotten so big, they've lost touch with reality. With the amount of money that they're making, they've lost touch with reality. And I was just reading that the Wembley sold out in 3 hours. And Frank Warren has made a request
to extend the seats, right?
To add seats, right?
Yeah.
Did you see that? He wants to add seats. You know, it's just gotten beyond the point of ridiculousness of money. And I think a good example of this, and I don't mean to be reverting back to this, or we'll talk later, but did you see Canelo leaving the press conference? Did you see the I don't know what he was in, a Maserati or some kind of car that looked like a spaceship on 4 wheels, you know? It's like you're not a part of the people anymore, you know? Like, it's a disconnect from reality of how much money is involved. And when you're making the kind of money that even Dillian is making at $8 million for a guy who's 1-1 in his last 2 fights, you know, it's you know, I don't even think that they care anymore. And I think we have to take with a grain of salt whatever Tyson says, like usual, you know, because you just never know what he means, what he doesn't, you know, how much is for show, how much is for fun, how much is serious. You just don't know. So, okay, he's going to retire. All right. So let's see when he gives up the belts. Let's see after the ring if he makes the announcement and says, I'm giving up the belts, and we'll see. And then somebody else fights for them. And then if he does want to come back, he's got to fight to get them back. So,
by the way, shout out to the real Reg, I believe it is. He says Canelo left in a Bugatti today at the press conference with Bivol. We'll get to that in a second. But just
my bad. I'm not up on the latest in crazy cars that nobody could afford.
Don't you drive a Ferrari, Russ?
No,
I've seen you in a Ferrari before.
No.
I heard, but I found out this week you once drove a Mustang. That was the height of
Mustang, yes, but Ferrari, no.
All right, but Fury Whyte, though, technically, Whyte does present a challenge from the power perspective, but if Deontay Wilder wasn't able to keep Fury down, do you think Whyte can?
No.
But it's still, so it's crazy. It's still going to draw that much interest from a fight that many people don't see Dillian Whyte winning.
I can't see how it could even conceivably possible, like what he could do to outpoint or knock out Tyson Fury, unless it's a Fury that is so massively unprepared, so massively out of shape that he just can't get away from anything and doesn't get up for the fight. I just can't see how this is going to be conceivably possible for him to do that. Now, it's not taking away, I'm not saying it's that to take it away from Whyte, because Whyte does possess certain skills. He's got good power, you know, but I don't think he has Deontay Wilder power. I don't think he has Deontay Wilder type power.
But better boxing, right? You would agree?
To a degree, but I don't think he has the physical presence that Wilder had. You know, Wilder matched up in height with Fury. I think that's going to be a big problem for Dillian dealing with that kind of height. And as far as the popularity of the fight is concerned, I don't even think that. I think the fight is so massive over there, not because it's for the heavyweight title, but because it's 2 big British guys going at it. That could have been a non-title fight and probably would have been just as successful. Yeah. I was in the UK when Chisora fought Whyte, and it was massive. And there was nothing on it. It was a British fight. You know, it might have been for a British title. I don't know. But it was just for a British fight, and it was packed. The 20,000 people in Manchester, you know. So I certainly could see that the interest is because it's two British guys and not necessarily because it's for the heavyweight championship of the world.
And then we have a comment here about Tyson Fury about the fact that he didn't really look good against Otto Wallin. That's a fight that he had to cut and won, but yeah, struggled a little bit against a southpaw fighter in Wallin, who was maybe more top 15 than definitely top 5. Look, I think people expect Usyk to give Fury trouble. That's the fight I think everybody wants to see. But now, of course, this could all be derailed if, first of all, Fury does retire, if he's true to his word. And we don't know now, of course, with what's going on in Ukraine, when the heck Usyk will be able to fight again. So I think it's disappointing that we may not see Fury fight anybody but Wilder or you know, other champions.
In response to this, Matt, and I think every champion in history during their reign has looked bad against inferior opposition. And it happens, you know, like maybe Wallin was better than we thought, you know, and put up a better performance. And if Wallin is better than you think, and Tyson doesn't put up the performance he should, that spreads the gap a little bit and makes it look like it was a little more competitive. In the case of Wilder, while you can turn around and say, oh, Wilder doesn't have any skill, or he was sloppy, or, you know, he's unskilled. He was undefeated and he was crushing guys. And in the previous fight, you know, in the first fight, he dropped Tyson twice, you know, and then he drops him again in the third fight. So, you know, there definitely was something there, but he got up for those fights. You know, he had to dig deep and deal with a monster in Wilder, you know, a dangerous guy, and he was able to do that. So, like I said, unless mentally he doesn't check in for the Whyte fight, I just can't see what Whyte's going to do to overcome that height and deal with that. It's a problem, I think.
We did have a comment, and I think maybe a relevant question. Just, Russ, being a historian of boxing, the concept of lineal champion, right? The guy who beat the guy who beat the guy, not having necessarily belts associated with it, but to try to determine who's the actual champion in a division. Not something we see as much, I find, these days. Sanctioning bodies and television networks have really made it that you talk about them more so maybe than the lineal title. And Fury is associated being the lineal champion by virtue of defeating Vladimir Klitschko, who was once the lineal champ. If you want to explain that concept, Russell, do you remember the first time you heard that lineal champion title, that non-official belt being given out?
I don't remember the first time I heard it, but I understood exactly what it meant, and you explained it perfectly. You know, it's the direct line from John L. Sullivan right down to you. If this guy beat this guy, he beat this guy, to beat this guy, to beat this guy, to become the champion. And unfortunately, in a lot of divisions, the belts have been fragmented, and you had a champion, for example, the IBF champion, the IBF heavyweight champion of the world. The first one was Larry Holmes. He was made champion. There was nobody before him. He didn't win that title from anybody. So if you look back on, let's say, IBF history, you would say the IBF lineal champion is the guy that went from Holmes to Spinks to so on, to so on, to so on. That would be the IBF champion. But in terms of going back all the way to John L. Sullivan, that's exactly what you explained, Matt, and you did it quite well, that it goes, you know, it's the guy who beat the guy who beat the guy. And based on that win over Klitschko is how Fury became lineal heavyweight champion. And I thought it was always a mistake, but apparently not. I thought it was linear, you know, the line between them, but it's not. It's lineal. So
that's like bridge weight and bridger weight division.
Yeah, correct.
Canelo, you talked a lot about. He's getting the Bivol fight at 175 for Bivol's WBA title. Now, Canelo had, of course, all the options, and I'm happy that he's going to end up not fighting Makabu, the cruiserweight title holder, which I thought would have been somewhat of a bizarre fight. Canelo, who's the super middleweight champion of the world by having pretty much beaten everybody in that division, now had the options and was offered a PBC option. There was Charlo, and then a fight against possibly, I believe, David Benavidez, who's probably the best fighter at 168 right now, who doesn't have a title. And then if you look at the 175 and the DAZN pay-per-view option was presented to him was Dimitri Bivol, and then a fight against Triple G, a third fight against Golovkin, who would move up from middleweight to super middleweight, provided Golovkin defeats Riyado Murata April 9th in Japan, which is not an easy fight for Golovkin in Japan for the middleweight title. Canelo elects to fight Bivol and Golovkin, or at least signs that deal, that agreement, press conference was today. The fight is May 7th. Bivol is maybe one of Canelo's toughest challenges on paper, even though I don't think he necessarily presents the most entertaining style. He is going to be a difficult boxing matchup for Canelo. But I get the sense that your first impression was that you're kind of siding with now the consequences indirectly that the Russian athletes are facing from some of the sanctions that other sports leagues had, and including in boxing, all sanctioning bodies except the WBA are saying that Russian citizens and their fighters might be put on hold right now, where Benavidez, the fighter that you work with as well, Russ, he might be impacted in his unification fight against Joe Smith, but Bivol in his WBA title is going to be allowed to fight Canelo.
It's a very, very delicate and touchy situation. Look, I know Vadim, who is Bivol's manager, good guy, wants to do good for his fighter, you know, has moved his fighter into becoming the light heavyweight champion of the world. Bivol comes from a great amateur background. So he's still with the same coach, is fighting, you know, Canelo in the biggest fight of his career. And it's hard to say, you know, to impose the sanctions on these guys when you know them personally, you know them. And it's just a difficult time now, Matt. It's something, I mean, I don't even know what I want to say about that. Right now, it's, all I know is that I was surprised that Eddie went ahead and announced it. Not sure of what backlash might have existed, but he went and did it. Look, I guess the UK fans are going to be in for a treat, you know, to see that fight. And again, you know, Canelo didn't pick a walk in the park, but Canelo could make it look like a walk in the park.
You think Bivol is the type of fight that even Canelo moving up back to 175 for the first time? And Scully brought this up when we did the podcast a few weeks ago about when Kovalev fought Canelo. Canelo made actually his catch weight, right? Kovalev wasn't allowed to rehydrate to whatever extent he wanted. And I think with Bivol now, he's going to face a true light heavyweight, skillful guy who looked a lot bigger than him at the press conference today, but maybe doesn't bring the excitement in his fights than others have in the past. Like, to me, this is a fight, but you think Canelo can really outclass Bivol in a sense?
I think so. I think he could. And just because, not because Bivol isn't for real, he is. And I've seen him before he became champion. But there's just seems to be something lately, especially defensively, that has separated Canelo from the rest of the pack. That's just something that I'm seeing in the ring. His confidence, his power, his ability to walk these guys down and not worry about what's coming at him. It almost seems like he's watching these guys in slow motion, that he sees this stuff from a mile away and casually walks through it, and, you know, he sees everything. And even on the rounds that he may lose on the judges' scorecards, he wins in the long-term battle. He wins in the mind. He's making you work to win that round while he's resting. He's doing it on purpose to make you win the round and work harder. That's the kind of control I feel that this guy has in the ring. And look, if you'd have asked me that 10 years ago about Canelo, I would not be saying these things about Canelo. Believe me, I would not be telling you what I'm telling you.
Maybe even less than 10 years ago, right? Like even before, like when you saw Canelo in the first fight against Golovkin compared to what he is now is
yeah. The second one really started to change things for me. And he's evolved. And he's one of those guys where the way he fights and the power he has, size doesn't make a difference. It doesn't matter. You're not hitting him. You're not landing. You're not hitting him. So punching power's out the window. Doesn't matter. He doesn't allow you to wrestle with him. And when you do, he's a strong guy himself. That's out the window. And he punches just as hard as those guys. He's legitimately as equally devastating puncher at light heavyweight as he is at super middle. He will hurt you. Now, maybe, you know, let me rephrase that. He might punch harder at super middle, but still punches plenty hard enough to hurt you at light heavy. So it's not like, oh, he's hitting me, nothing's happening. No, something's happening, and he's hurting you. So there's just something special about the dude, you know, that his skill level, and I love that, you know, he's won with skill, not just with power. Not just with power. He's not just obliterating guys. There's skill to it. There's a skill level in him that I don't think we've seen in a top-notch fighter like that. Without dating myself, to a level that no one else is doing it at, is like Floyd, the way he dominated at a skill level. He dominated guys that were obliterating other people.
He dominated Canelo.
And Canelo wasn't obliterating people at that time. But yeah, he was a young kid. But I'll say one of my favorite fighters, Juan Manuel Marquez. He made Juan Manuel Marquez look inept.
Yeah, but wait, that was Juan Manuel Marquez. That was a weird decision from a Marquez blown up, a bit out of shape 147, and not the same Marquez at the 147 when he ended up fighting Pacquiao all those years later. But yeah, nevertheless, Marquez is looked at as one of the better counterpunchers of all time, and Mayweather toyed with him, despite the fact that I think when you look at the context of that fight, it clearly wasn't the best Marquez possible. But I think you're 100% right, Russ, about how Canelo now has this mystique about him and this confidence that he kind of seems unbeatable. So as an observer, would you have option one? Would you have preferred to see option PBC/Fox of Charlo and Benavidez for Canelo's next two fights? Or would you have rather see what he's now electing to do, which is Bivol versus Canelo, and then Golovkin, provided Golovkin beats Murata? As an observer, which option would you have rather see?
Before I answer that, I have to take note. If you see here, Jerry Capobianco just joined, and Jerry trains and handles light heavyweight champion of the world, Joe Smith. So I think, yeah. So I want to say hi to Jerry. We've been in opposite corners, you know, with Alvarez and stuff, but a real throwback guy, a real throwback boxing guy. So and he's got a hell of a fighter in Joe.
And we hope the Joe Smith-Beterbiev fight happens this summer as planned for the unify the titles, but now that could be in a bit of a pickle with what's going on.
Yeah. Yes, we hope so. So thanks for joining, Jerry.
So back to the options: Charlo Benavidez against Canelo, or what he elected to do, which is Bivol and then Triple G.
I don't mind the Bivol situation. I mean, because a lot of this, you have to understand, comes from a little bit of, again, like we've spoken about before in the past, you know, not so much the managers, not even so much the promoters anymore, but who has the rights, the television rights, who has the broadcast rights. So, you know, obviously, if you're going the Bivol route, it's because you're doing a DAZN thing. If you're going the PBC route, you know, so that's the sad thing about that. So there must be a reason. Listen, he's a very astute businessman surrounded by a great team, and you know, you have to think that he did the decision to fight Bivol, which I think you know, Bivol's an undefeated light heavyweight champion. Nobody's sitting around saying, Canelo's moving, he's fighting a stiff. Not a stiff, but I agreed one thing with what Canelo said.
Is that with the fact that everybody's kind of criticizing him no matter what now between these?
Yeah, and I think I said this on my, I think I said this kind of quoting Canelo as it pertained to Lomachenko. You know, no matter who you choose to fight, someone's gonna say you're ducking the guy you didn't choose to fight. You know, and that's the point Canelo was making. And he put out a nice list saying, if I fight this guy, I'm ducking this guy. If I fight this guy, I'm ducking this guy. It doesn't matter who he fights, he ends up ducking somebody. But he made a very interesting point. None of these guys want to fight each other to get a shot at the cash cow. And
I'm not sure. Yeah, but I'm not sure that's 100% true, Russ. I don't think David Benavidez would turn down anybody.
I didn't say he would.
But now you're saying none of these guys. That's exactly what you just said.
Okay. Let's look at this. Let's say David Benavidez, who we love. He
would fight Charlo. He'd fight Charlo tomorrow.
I'm sure he would. Would Charlo fight him?
That one I'm not so sure about.
Okay, so you know,
Charlo Andrade, they've been going back and forth. That's a fight at super middleweight or super middleweight at this point.
There's a lot of fights that are not.
Bivol and Beterbiev, like Bivol never seemed to want to fight Beterbiev.
Let's remove the Russian invasion for 1 second. How could there not, ever since both guys won the title, how could there not have been an all-Russian matchup of Bivol against Beterbiev, or before that, Kovalev against Beterbiev? Like, how do you not make those fights in Russia, forget what's happened now, you know, notwithstanding what happened now, but prior to where we are now, how were these fights not made? How did you go along fighting other guys and them not fighting each other? I don't know. It must have to do with promotions and television rights and whatnot, but it's crazy. Like those are.
Let's call Mark Ramsey and ask him. He'll be able to tell you with some, and from the Berbiev perspective, I should say.
Maybe, but that's one thing. And if Jerry's still listening, I'm sure he'll agree to this. That's one thing that I think has changed greatly in the sport. You know, like guys should be fighting guys. Those fights should be made. We saw someone said, you know, payday, and that's what they want. It's the same thing. It was almost standard script. Every time a welterweight fought, the first thing they would say is, "I'm ready to fight Floyd." You didn't do anything to merit it to fight Floyd, but they were calling him out. Why? Because he's the payday. Everyone wanted to call out Pacquiao. Why? Because he's the payday. And they're doing the same thing now with Canelo. They're not interested in who else they can fight. They want the direct road with the least risk possible to fight the guy who's going to provide the payday.
Yeah, but some of these guys do have legitimate arguments to fight Canelo now. There's just a lot of them. Like Canelo, it's even surprising to me that Canelo is still electing to choose challenges that they're not the easiest fights. And he could choose to have easier fights and make still a lot of money. And I think he's in his early 30s at this point, but has over 50 professional fights. He could really be more selective. So I give him credit for still finding challenges, and he deserves those challenges. I personally would prefer to see Charlo Benavidez as the next two fights for Canelo, but I completely understand and respect his decision to fight Bivol. And then Triple G will be the biggest casual sports interest fight, because most people know Golovkin more than they know Bivol or Charlo or Benavidez. But a lot of people think the Golovkin fight, by the time he gets to a trilogy fight against Canelo's going to be a massive favorite. And some people think Murata's going to beat Golovkin, who nears 40 years old or just turned 40.
Well, that's going to be the deciding factor, because that fight could go into the water. Personally, I think that fight could tank if Golovkin doesn't look good against Murata, or in the event he loses against Murata. Now you've got to switch everything around. You know, now you might be in a position where you have Canelo fighting Murata, and that might not generate the interest or the money that it would have generated fighting Golovkin. So that could be a problem there too.
Yeah, Canelo, I mean, even though it's a 2-fight deal, he's the cash cow, and he can decide probably at any point what he wants to do on a fight-by-fight basis. So let's see, first and foremost, though, I think there is an asterisk that the Bivol fight, depending on what the WBA decides and what happens in the world events in the next few weeks, could throw a wrench into that fight. But I hope it happens. I hope it happens, and I hope we see Canelo fight, of course, Golovkin for a third time.
Well, for that to happen, Golovkin is going to raise the interest of that fight, because we saw Golovkin back-to-back in what you have to say was at least maybe as close to his prime as possible, certainly closer to his prime than he is now. Agreed?
Yes.
So we saw the competitiveness there. If he goes out there and obliterates Murata and gives hope that he can come back with, it'll be great. If he struggles with Murata, it's going to be a problem.
We'll have to talk to our friend and Golovkin's former trainer, Abel Sanchez, as we get closer to the Murata fight. I'd love to hear his thoughts on that bout. A few minutes left, Russ. We got to get to Josh Taylor and the decision last week. It's created a lot of uproar, I should say, in the UK, especially where Catterall, a lot of people thought he deserved to get the nod. The judges gave it to Josh Taylor, who was fighting in his hometown of Scotland. And it was weird that Taylor, the 140-pound champion, in his first defense, has a really tough time against Catterall, relatively underdog, big sizable underdog. And Kambosos was able, in Lopez's first defense of the lightweight title, pull the upset against Lopez. Both fights were excellent. I thought, of course, Kambosos, his fight against Lopez was much more offensive and entertaining. I thought the Josh Taylor-Catterall fight was really a tough fight to score. It looked like Josh Taylor was trying to get Catterall out, maybe to try to impress the hometown crowd with a big knockout, and really was lunging on many of his shots. A lot of clinching. There's points deductions, and many people, especially public opinion, feel that Catterall was kind of robbed. I know you didn't see all aspects, all rounds of the fight, because you were in Toronto for a pro show, working of your own, but there's something that Tony Bellew, the former, of course, champion himself in the cruiserweight division, I thought his comments were interesting about the fact here that the accountability that judges and referees after bouts, especially controversial decisions. So let me read you what he wrote here in a second. And I think he was trying to get people to say, listen, if one guy is going to be losing a decision like Catterall here, if he's going to be, there should be more accountability. So his exact tweet was, I've seen this before, and I'll say it again. Officials and referees need to explain themselves after the fights. We get punched in the head for 36 minutes and then get a camera shoved in the face and have to explain our tactics and thoughts. Why can't the officials do the same? What do you think about that?
I think it's 1,000,000% right. And I think you should have accountability and you should be able to justify your scorecard. I also think that because of outside influences, and I'll leave it at that, whatever they may be, from the hometown crowd to the promoters to whoever's paid your ticket to come to the fight, whatever, outside influences, the pressure you're under, how is it that we're okay as a sport to say, in a sport that's judged now, and it's judged objectively, you could have three guys looking at things, and you and I have disagreed on how we see fights being scored. And to this day, I disagree with the fact that Marcus Brown won the first 2 rounds against Arthur Beterbiev. You know, he didn't. He moved, and we assume, oh, yeah, look at him, he's moving. Yeah, you can't. Beterbiev can't touch him. Well, who was touching Beterbiev? The ref? Nobody was touching him either. You know what I mean? Yeah. So depends how you look at it. Okay, so let's say I'm looking at it that way. The judges looked at it another way. How is it in our sport where it really doesn't take up a lot of space that we only have 3 people judging? How is it that we don't have backups and it's like kind of like get a consensus from more than just 3 people, because there are thousands of people judging the fight and come up with a decision, which usually the masses are usually right. When someone says a fighter was done wrong, usually the collective mass proves that yeah, he was done wrong, he got ripped off. It's very rare that the collective mass says he was ripped off and they were wrong about it. You know, it's usually very rare.
Yeah, it can happen, but I get your point.
Yeah, so why are we leaving the millions of dollars that are on the table in the hands of 3 people who can be influenced very easily, and you don't have another 3 or another 5 guys sitting around a committee looking, and then the judges having to justify their card, why I gave it to him. And if they don't answer the whys properly, they never judge again. If you can't justify that properly, if you have 7 people or 10 people scoring a fight and 9 people give the round to a guy and this guy turns around and goes the other way, or sometimes we see, and this is another thing that the fans don't realize, we see scores that are very close. But when you look at the cards, they're all over the place. They're opposite. Well, you know, they've given the wrong round to a guy. 2 guys have given it to one guy. Another guy's given it. They come out with the same 114, 113 type scores, but they're based on all different rounds, and no one has to justify that. So I agree with what Bellew said. There's a flaw in our scoring system, and they're not accountable. They never. And that's why I like Matt, and we talked about this here. What was the name of the referee that got on there and justified his call of no knockdown in the round? And I agreed with him that there was a knockdown. You said, oh, he got touched, and Jim Gray interviewed him and said, oh, you're saying there was no knockdown? No, he was slipping. He was already off balance. The punch didn't knock him down. So
yeah, this was a few weeks ago on Showtime. The name escapes me, but I'll try and come up with it. A fight on Showtime a few weeks ago.
You know so I think they should be accountable, and Bellew's right about this. I like Tony. Tony sometimes says things that really make a lot of sense, and I have to agree with him on this one. That if you're so confident that you're a professional judge, you know, I'm a professional boxing judge. Okay, well, state your case, son. State your case of how you ended up with this score. I want to know why you gave that round to him. Why did the 2 other judges give it to him and you gave it to this guy? Or sometimes, why did you 2 give him that round? He was right. Those guys won the round. You know, when you have more people keeping track of what the scoring going on, whether it's the press, members of the media. Listen, we all know for a fact that every boxing expert knows that the Lomachenko Lopez fight was a close fight. Everybody who knew boxing, the fighters, Andre Ward, Terrence Crawford, Roy Jones, all fighters, they scored in a close fight. The judges had it like a walk in the park. Like Loma didn't even show up. And that wasn't the case. And that's wrong. And there was one that was by a wide margin. If I'm not mistaken, was it Julie Letterman who had such a wide score for Teofimo? So, you know, I think we need to improve on that. There has to be a better paper trail of how guys are scoring fights. But
you know, I have an argument though for you where you said the masses are usually right. A few weeks ago, you had John Ryder winning, as did the official judges. I guarantee you the masses did not have John Ryder winning against Danny Jacobs. So I'm just saying, backtrack maybe on the masses argument is not necessarily correct.
I'd like to say, we don't know that it's correct that you say the masses disagree. Like,
oh, come on, Russ. Everybody on social media had Danny Jacobs, or almost everybody had Danny Jacobs beating John Ryder.
I don't know that. I will neither deny nor admit that.
No, of course. But my point being is that it's still a very subjective sport, but I agree that the judges, there shouldn't be any issues of being accountable. It's not an attack because you want accountability. That's the other thing. They're very defensive. Now,
but that's what the problem is. People think because you want to know that you're attacking them.
Yeah, Julie Letterman had it 119-109 for Teofimo Lopez against Lomachenko. That's pretty bad. So and usually Julie Letterman's a good judge. But what was this? What's that? You know, I don't know. It's up to you. You say what you want to say. I'm just saying she's had good scorecards in the past. Not this one though.
Not this one though.
Okay. All right. So just before we wrap up, so Josh Taylor said he's going to move up to 147, and he's willing to give Catterall a rematch. And Catterall was not really well known, didn't have a big pedigree resume, but sometimes that's deceiving because you're an undefeated fighter. You have the mentality that you can win against anybody, and not because you haven't fought top opposition means that you cannot beat top opposition. So Catterall proved himself as being a legitimate fighter at 140. Now, Taylor says, I'll give you the rematch at 147. The guy that Josh Taylor wanted to fight before Catterall was a possible big fight at 147 against Terrence Crawford. And I really think that if you look at it, what the performance from Taylor had this past weekend, there's no way that people are going to be hyped or think he has a chance of beating Terrence Crawford. But Crawford is a bit of no man's land anyways right now. So the 140-pound division is a bit wide open. And Jose Ramirez, who Josh Taylor just defeated, he's fighting Jose Pedraza this upcoming weekend. And that's an interesting fight in the 140-pound division. But do you think Josh Taylor at 147 against Terrence Crawford is a fight you want to see, Russ? Or what do you want to see from Terrence Crawford based on what the options are now?
Okay, first of all, as far as the Danny Jacobs Ryder fight is concerned, the masses you're talking about were the American masses that had Jacobs.
Well, I don't think it's just American, Russ, but okay.
Okay, that's fine.
Well, the Scottish masses had Josh Taylor winning, that's for sure.
I don't even know about that though. You know, but the English are not Scottish, so
no, I know. That's what I'm saying. The English had Catterall, and the Scottish had Josh.
Yeah. Look, I think to explain the performance, I can only put it down to this: Josh Taylor's proved how good a fighter he is by going all the way, winning the fights. Yes. You have to think, especially in this day and age, like this is so different from back in the day. Coming off the mental high of becoming the only undisputed champion in the sport right now, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. Am I correct in that?
At the moment, currently, probably so at 140. Crawford also was 140 undisputed for a while. So that division has been getting... Right now, Josh Taylor was the only one, I believe. Yeah, I could confirm that.
A huge win, the most success, arguably the most...
Is Canelo now? Is Canelo undisputed at 168?
Oh, he might be. Yeah, Canelo might be undisputed now at 68. That's right. Canelo at 68.
Yes, Canelo at 68 and Josh Taylor at 140.
So you're coming off that kind of a high, and now you're going back to fight a local fight in Scotland as kind of your homecoming, right? It's your homecoming. Your focus is elsewhere. To me, this was a mental thing, not preparing for the danger that lay ahead. And I think that's why you saw the performance that you saw. So when you have a guy who's kind of checked out mentally because he's focusing on the promotion and getting tapped on the back by everywhere he goes, you know, and being the principal guy and selling tickets and whatnot. You have him who's not right at the top of his game. And then you have Catterall, who with Jamie Moore, who's proven to be, you know, a really good coach, a really good trainer, comes up with a way to neutralize Josh Taylor and everything he's going to do, raises his game, and turn it into an ugly fight, turn it into a clinch fest, turn it into a job where the referee just, you know, has a horrific night, you know, loses control of the bout, makes silly calls, and you end up with what you end up with. Yeah. So I think that's how we can explain Josh Taylor. As far as him moving up to 147, I don't care if it's 147 or 140. Crawford is, to me, is something special. Crawford proved that with Porter as well. He's able to dig down. He can do it from the left hand, from the southpaw side. He can do it from orthodox. He can fight on the inside, outside, speed. He's a complete package. When we talk about pound for pound, and I've always told you this before, that people don't understand what pound for pound means. It means the ability to execute perfection in boxing in every aspect that concerns the game. The tools of boxing, Crawford has those tools, and he does it to perfection. So I think Josh Taylor might find a big difference in what he was beating at 140, the opposition that was there, as compared to what Terence Crawford is at 147.
And I think Terence Crawford is one of those fighters that, as time passes, his resume looks even more impressive, because one of the big wins he had was he dismantled Kell Brook, and Kell Brook still looked pretty good a few weeks ago. Now people want to see him involved again in fights that are relevant around the welterweight to 154-pound division. So I think Crawford, we need to see him active while he still appears to be at his prime or in his prime, but it's a bit of a complicated issue right now of who he's going to fight next. And I do think that if he ends up fighting Josh Taylor, he'd be a big favorite. But Terence Crawford, if he's not going to fight Errol Spence, he's going to have to fight somebody. And Errol Spence has a challenge in April, of course, against Ugas, which will, I think, be a very, very difficult fight for Errol Spence.
Yeah, I agree.
We'll have time to talk about that fight.
Didn't you say we had to be careful of the time?
Yeah, you have 2 minutes. 2 minutes left. What do you want to? Anything else you want to end or address before we go here tonight?
No, I enjoy doing this live, and I'm telling you again, I want to do one of these things where we can engage with the people, where we come on, we don't have it. I know it doesn't happen often where there's nothing to talk about in the world of boxing, right. But to come on these things and be able to say hello to the people, to talk to the people, to get the questions from them, to ask the questions, to debate with them while they're typing away trying to answer, and we're able to say something back at them. I would really like to do that. But yeah. I don't want to be the guy that goes over the limit and you tell me now we can't record that. So I'm out. I said what I have to say. I'm having my cup of tea now.
A little shout out also to our friend Stéphane Lalinu, their pro fighter out of Canada. And we'll definitely do a Q&A, Mr. Anber, at some point also a bit earlier in the day, so you can have all these different time zones that you have your fan base there in the UK. This is very late for them, right? And not everybody's on Russ Anber o'clock, so.
Unfortunately not, but that's what we'll be on next week, because I will be in the UK for Mick Conlan. So
that's a big fight as well. So yeah, definitely we'll touch base. Keep us posted as well, of course, with what's going on with Usyk, Lomachenko, and their other friends and fighters that you have relationships with in the Ukraine right now. So our thoughts and prayers are with them.
Absolutely.
And, anything else, Mr. Anber? Or if not, thank you for people to tune in. Calling Russ Anber podcast. If you missed part of the conversation, you want to catch some of it. Some of the talks, we talked about Tyson Fury, of course, Canelo, a lot of topics, a lot of hot issues right now in boxing as we approach a very busy springtime. It will be available on YouTube and other platforms. Tell a friend. Let us know your thoughts. Mr. Anber, I wish you a good evening.
Thoughts and prayers in Ukraine, guys.